delighted to get the opportunity to be with people who belong to and are associated with Marymount International School. It's going to be a reflection on, as Matthew said, on John's Gospel, on the 4th chapter of John's Gospel. So in a moment, I will share the screen so that we can ponder the text as well. But it's an approach to Lent. And one of the ways I approach Lent is to see it as a time of discovery. And it's a coincidence, happy or not, that we're also thinking about COVID. So if we take Lent then as a period of discovery for us, I think also this last year has been something of that nature as well, for those willing to reflect on COVID and its implications for us. So as a time of discovery, I think of those three words that we associate with Lent: time of prayer, time for almsgiving, and a time for penance. So I'd like to think that our time of prayer can become a time of discovery of God. Our almsgiving can be a time of discovery of the world in which we live, and particularly of our neighbor, our brothers and sisters in the world. And I think also our time of penance in Lent is a time of discovery about ourselves. That life of penance leads us to an emptying of ourselves and to the idea that now we can be more attentive to God. And so by way of illustrating these three discoveries, I thought I might use this gospel of the conversation between Jesus and the Samaritan woman at the well. So in this, I see a conversation. I tend to think of our faith overall very much as a conversation between us and God, conversation between us and our neighbor, our communities, other people, and in a real sense, a conversation within ourselves. And very often that's what we mean by reflecting. We're talking to ourselves. We're discovering meaning. So in this conversation, we see that it begins with two people. Jesus, tired from his journey, sat down at the well. It was about noon, and a woman of Samaria came to draw water. The story doesn't always go into much detail, but I think we have to be aware of two people with their stories. Each of them has a story. And so when they sit down at the well, the conversation that ensues is a conversation in which one is discovering the other. And in the conversation, each is discovering the self. The woman is on a journey of discovery. And I would say also that Jesus learns more about himself because of this conversation. As people, they also have desires. There is something that they want. The story begins with the woman coming to the well to draw water. That's her immediate desire. The implication in the way the conversation develops is that Jesus too has a desire. We would say a desire for the happiness and salvation of this woman, a desire for souls, a desire for salvation, a desire for us. And the conversation, as well as being one of discovery, is also, I think, a conversation where our desires are being educated. The more we know of ourselves and of God and of the world, the more our desires for ourselves and for the world are being refined, educated, filled out. So Jesus says very simply, give me a drink. I'm thirsty. This thirst for humanity, thirst for life. On the cross, he will say, I am thirsty. The woman's desires, at least for the moment, are very limited. She wants some peace and quiet. This text says that it's noon. This woman comes to the well when she knows there will be no one else there. And so she's surprised by finding this particular man. But then this particular man has something else. The Samaritan woman looks at him and says to him, how can you, a Jew, ask me, a Samaritan woman, for a drink? And that's where we see the two stories. She has her identity, and so has he. And so these two stories meet in good conversation. And then he goes on, and here's this great phrase, woman, if you only knew the gift, you would be the one to ask. And what is the gift? Well, we would say in our study of the spiritual life that really the gift is one. The gift is the gift of God. The gift of God in our lives. The gift of a deep spiritual life where our deepest motivation is the love that is put there by God. And so to be able to say to the woman, and to be able to say to any of us, if you only knew the gift, look what a difference that would make to your life. Look what that would mean to the educating of your desires, to what you want in life. And we may have thousands of desires, and that's probably a good thing. Not to have desire really is to be dead. But then when you see the multiplicity of desires in our lives, yes, we want to sort them out. And in a very real sense, Lent is a time of sorting out our desires and allowing us to discover the gift. Our desire for God, that now we are able to see more clearly. And as we see it more clearly, I suppose our desire then becomes stronger. And so Jesus says to the woman, if you only knew the gift, then that would be so strong in you that you would be the one to ask. You would really ask for that gift, powerfully, with great conviction. And you would receive the gift of living water. You would have asked me, and I would have given you living water, life, the life of God, the life of the Spirit. And then we come to that glorious moment where we can recognize it in our own lives. Whatever it is that we see as resistance in our lives, promise us a win in the lottery, and somehow we resist. You remember the man at the pool when Jesus says, "Would you like to be cured?" And there's something that stops the man from saying, "Yes, of course I would." And here we have the woman, instead of saying, "Yes, give me that water," she finds an excuse. And the excuse is in the bucket. I sometimes think we have to be aware of the bucket in our lives. Those little resistances in our lives, when presented with the beauty of the gospel, when presented with the beauty of the Christian life, when presented with happiness, there's something in us that says, wait a minute, you have no bucket, sir. So we overcome that. And so Jesus is able to explain that this water doesn't require a bucket. And when he has explained it, then she says, "Sir, give me this water." Now we can see from her reaction that she really hasn't fully understood the nature of that water. All she can think is, if I had that water, I wouldn't have to come back here every day to draw water. So at least we've got that far. She's beginning to come around, to think. And now Jesus has to lead her further into the conversation. It's hard to know why Jesus thought about her husband. Had he intuitions? Did he know straight away by meeting this woman at the well at noon that she had a story behind her? And here his desire for her salvation continues. A Jesus who knows our story and wants to lead us gently into recognizing our story in order to lead us on to a fuller appreciation of his mercy and of his love. And so this woman has this story, and she's not proud of the story, and yet she accepts this man entering into that story and asking her to recognize her story. And so in her discovery of herself, she is now going to be able to see a new way of approaching her own story. And there's the story. She has had many men. And despite having so many men, there seems not to have been all that much love in her life. Certainly, it didn't allow her to feel good about herself. And so she comes again and again to the well when she thinks nobody is going to be there. Now we take it a little bit further. And this woman begins to say, "I see that you are a prophet." Way back in the Old Testament, when the prophet Elijah goes and saves the life of the child of the woman from Sarepta, it's the same reaction. I see that you are a prophet. I see that there's something in you that is of God. And that's the woman speaking. But again, we almost come back to the bucket. We come back to a conversation about religion. It's like as if we all do that a bit. When we're under pressure and we want to do something nice, we'll bring the subject of conversation around to religion. And here this woman does that. So now she's recognizing that he's a Jew and she's a Samaritan. So it might be better to talk about that than to be talking about her. But she gets an answer that she might not have understood all that fully. But it's an answer that has meant an awful lot to us down through the centuries. And it is this: believe me, woman, the hour is coming when you will worship the Father, neither on this mountain nor in Jerusalem. You people worship what you do not understand. We worship what we understand, because salvation is from the Jews. But the hour is coming, and is now here, when true worshippers will worship the Father in spirit and truth. The Father seeks such people to worship him. So somehow here, Jesus is able to say to the woman, yes, you worship on the mountain. We worship in Jerusalem. But maybe that's not all that important now. Maybe our religious differences can give way to something deeper. And it is the idea of knowing God in spirit and in truth, in worshiping God in spirit and in truth. We could even say worshiping God in spirit and leave out the truth, because worshiping God in spirit will be the truth where we are open to the Spirit of God. Or we could leave out the spirit and say worshiping in truth, knowing that in order to get to the full truth, we require the Spirit. So we have moved now into a very deep level of faith, and it's coming from Jesus. And it's saying to the woman, it's not about your mountain. It's not about our Jerusalem. Ultimately, your mountain and our Jerusalem have to lead us to the truth that is the Spirit. So anything about Lent being discovery of ourselves, and even more discovery about God, comes to the surface here. That in all that we do, we are being asked to allow ourselves to be guided to the truth about God and about ourselves through the work of the Spirit. God is Spirit, and those who worship him must worship in spirit and in truth. The woman said to him, I know that the Messiah is coming, the one called the Anointed. When he comes, he will tell us everything. So now we're dealing in the area of discovery and of revelation. The Messiah will tell us everything. We remember when Jesus was about to depart from his disciples, and he promises them the coming of the Holy Spirit. And one of the things he says about the Spirit is that the Spirit will remind them of everything that he had said, and with that, everything he had done. So we stay with that theme of revelation, what Jesus reveals to the woman, what the Spirit reveals to the woman, and what the Spirit reveals to us. And that comes through our conversation with ourselves, which takes the form of prayer, our conversation with the world, which takes the form of almsgiving, our conversation with ourselves, which takes the form of recognizing where we have to change, and that's our penance. And so the woman left her jar there, At this point, the story, and I didn't include it, the story tells us that the disciples who had left Jesus to go into the town to get supplies, they now come back and they find him talking to the woman. So in this unlikely situation of Jesus talking to a woman and the Jew talking to a Samaritan woman, the disciples raise questions. But the gospel leaves that there and brings our attention back to the woman. The woman goes back to the village now, to a place where she more than likely felt rejected. And she comes back with a whole new approach to her own life. She's now saying to the people, come and see someone who told me everything I have done. Come and see someone who has told me everything about myself. Could he be the Messiah? And what's good about this proclamation is this woman is more or less saying, this man told me everything about myself, and it was good to hear. This was not a sad story when she discovered her full story in the way that Jesus allowed her to tell her story, to look at her story, and to move from a terrible opinion about herself to this joy that she brings with her into the village when she tells the people that she has met somebody who was able to tell her everything about herself. And so I begin to see that as our approach, a possible approach to Lent. That we go from having our story, we recognize our desires, we follow our desires, but somehow through the practice of Lent, we are allowed to see our story and our desires in a new light. And that may come because we take this serious approach to Lent. We want Lent to have an effect in our lives. And so therefore, our celebration of the Eucharist, perhaps, is more attentive. Perhaps we're reading more of Scripture and learning, and that's our conversation, a prayerful reading of the Scriptures. I wonder how much conversation we allow ourselves as we go through Lent. There are times when we're inclined to approach Lent as a time of silence, more and more silence. And we have a way of approaching silence that says silence is not the absence of words. Silence is the cultivation of words. Good conversation is built on silence. It's not babble. The kind of conversation, and we saw it in the gospel, where every word can be weighed. And every word from Jesus is laden with salvation. And every word from the woman is laden with questioning. So silence, the silence of Lent, allows us the opportunity to listen to the words. It also educates us in the words that we will use ourselves. They won't be destructive words. They will be respectful words and searching words. So then when Lent becomes a conversation of discovery. We begin then to see how the great discovery of this time in the life of the church, the life of each one of us, is the moment when we discover resurrection in our lives. In a very real sense, this conversation has baptized the woman, transformed her, as we believe baptism does for us. And in that baptism, she has become somehow committed to this man and to his word. Jesus, when the mother of the Zebedees came to him and said, "Can my sons sit one at your right and one at your left?" And Jesus responds by saying, "That's all very well. That's not for me to decide. But can these sons of yours be baptized with the baptism with which I will be baptized?" And this is an adult baptism. This is the baptism that comes when we accept the word that comes from Jesus. And this is the baptism that leads us then to resurrection. We have taken on the word of Jesus. That word has taken possession of our lives, and we are now living out of the resurrection. We are resurrection people, but we need to discover that. And so Lent comes again to us to help us to discover ourselves, the world in which we live, and the God who brings resurrection into that world. Could he possibly be the Messiah? The people in the town, in the village, began to believe in him because of the word of the woman who testified, "He told me everything I have done." So this woman has now turned into a missionary. Somehow she has recognized more and more of the gift. And in a very real sense, she would be saying to the people, if you only knew the gift, you would be the ones to ask. And somehow that's what happens. Many more began to believe in him because of his word. And they said to the woman, "We no longer believe because of your word, for we have heard for ourselves, and we know that this is truly the Savior of the world. This is truly the risen one for us. This is truly the gift that meets our deepest desires." So that would be our wish, my wish for all of us, that Lent would be that time of discovery. Time also when our desires for good, for the gift, for one another, are educated and refined and strengthened, so that we go through Lent and are truly renewed by our own personal prayer, by our participation in the liturgy, by our willingness to do the penance of those who respond generously to the challenges of each life, of each day in our life, and as people who have now grown in our ability to love and share with all with whom we share this world.